I should have walked away the moment they mentioned the mountain. Everyone calls it Everest, like they own it. We call it Sagamatha, the goddess mother of the world. I should have known when these men in unmarked uniforms showed up at my door in Namche Bazaar talking about a geological consultation for a research station. Research stations don't pay enough to cover 3 years of my daughter's heart surgeries. They don't send military transports. And they definitely don't make you sign papers that threaten prosecution under laws you've never heard of if you speak about what you've seen. But Pema needed her next operation in 2 months, and the clinic in Kathmandu had already sent their 3rd notice. So here I sat, 2 kilometers beneath my goddess's skin, in a laboratory, counting prayer beads, while Commander Holzer stood behind me with his hand on his sidearm, like I might suddenly decide to run. Where would I go? We'd taken a cargo elevator down a shaft drilled straight through bedrock, past levels marked only with Greek letters, into what they called the beta level. The facility, Chawton Vault, I'd heard them whisper when they thought I wasn't listening, had that particular smell, engineered atmosphere that told you immediately you were somewhere unnatural, somewhere humans were never meant to be. A tomb for relics. These people had named their secret base after a Tibetan burial monument, and they wondered why I kept my mala beads moving through my fingers. The survey data Sherpa. Holzer's English was accented, Swiss, maybe German. He had that particular kind of military patience that was really just controlled impatience. Focus. I looked at the geological surveys spread across the laboratory bench. They showed natural cavern systems above us, carved by centuries of meltwater. The kind of passages my grandfather used to tell stories about. The kind where you could get lost and never be found, where the mountain would take you if you didn't show proper respect. These caverns connect to the surface? I asked, though I already knew they didn't. I'd been studying them for the past hour, and every potential exit had been carefully marked as sealed or impassable. That's not your concern. We need to know structural integrity if we have to expand operations upward. Expand operations. Like this place wasn't enough of an insult to the mountain already. Through the laboratory's reinforced window, I could see into the main work floor where technicians in white coats clustered around banks of equipment I couldn't identify. All of them throwing nervous glances at a security door marked with warnings in 12 languages. Behind that door, Holzer had told me, was the gamma level, the bottom. The real reason this place existed. Dr. Kepler, the lead scientist, a thin American who moved like he'd forgotten how to sleep, kept checking his tablet and muttering numbers to his assistant. Every few minutes he'd look at that security door and his jaw would tighten. They all did it, like they were waiting for something, or watching something. "What's down there?" I asked Holzer, not expecting an answer. "Nothing that concerns a geological consultant." One of the technicians had left a report on the adjacent bench. Most of it was incomprehensible. Energy readings, containment percentages, something about dimensional anchoring. But one phrase kept appearing, the 7, always capitalized, always followed by classification stamps so thick with black ink they looked like funeral marks. My grandmother used to tell stories about 7 demons trapped beneath the mountains by ancient heroes. Children's tales to make us behave. But the way these scientists moved, the way they kept checking that door, they moved like people guarding something, or guarding against something. "Your employer briefed you on emergency protocols?" Holzer asked. "You mean the part where I'm supposed to follow your orders without question?" "The part where you stay alive." Before I could respond, every light in the facility dimmed and brightened, like a heartbeat made of electricity. The technicians panicked. One dropped a glass beaker that shattered on the floor, but nobody moved to clean it up. They all turned to look at that security door. "Containment fluctuation in gamma," someone said. Dr. Kepler was already running to his console. "Pod 1 is destabilizing." Holzer grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise. "We're going down." "Down?" I tried to pull free. "If something's wrong, we should be going up." "We need to secure the assets." He was already moving, dragging me toward the security door, his entire unit, materialized from corners of the lab I hadn't even noticed them occupying. 12 soldiers in tactical gear, weapons that looked too advanced to be standard issue. "Commander, you can't be serious," Kepler was saying, but Holzer cut him off. "Protocols are clear, Doctor. Any containment breach requires immediate assessment and securing of remaining assets. You know what happens if we lose more than one?" The security door required 3 separate keycards, a biometric scan, and a code that Holzer entered with his body blocking the keypad. When it finally opened, I saw the elevator beyond. Not a cargo lift like the one we'd descended in, but something that looked like it belonged in a bank vault, all reinforced steel and emergency lighting. "I didn't sign up for this," I said, but my voice was lost in the continuing wail of alarms. The emergency lights had kicked in, bathing everything in that particular shade of red that makes everyone look like they're already covered in blood. Holzer shoved me into the elevator. "You signed up the moment you took our money." The doors sealed, and we dropped. My ears popped 3 times, 2 kilometers below the surface, and we were going deeper. My mala beads clicked through my fingers, 108 beads, one for each of the earthly temptations a soul must overcome. I was on bead 43 when the elevator shook and the lights went out completely. Emergency power kicked in a second later, but it was different, weaker. The elevator continued its descent, but I could hear the motors straining. "Primary power's offline," one of Holzer's soldiers reported, reading from a handheld device. The surge tripped half the grid. "The surge from what?" I asked. Nobody answered. At 2047 meters below the surface, the elevator stopped. The doors opened onto a chamber that made no sense. It was circular, carved from solid rock but polished to an unearthly smoothness. The walls curved up into darkness beyond the emergency light's reach. But it was what stood in the chamber that made my prayer beads stop moving. 7 pods, each the size of a small building, arranged in a perfect heptagon. 6 hummed with a sound that barely qualified as noise. The 7th, directly across from us, was screaming. Not literally, but that's the only word for the way the air around it warped and twisted, the way reality seemed to be tearing at the edges. The containment field, a barrier of pure energy, was fluctuating between blinding white and absolute black. "Evacuate the sanctum," Kepler was saying into his radio. "All personnel, evacuate immediately." But it was too late. The field collapsed. What emerged from Pod 1 wasn't anything my mind could immediately process. It was roughly the shape of a person, but made of something that wasn't matter in any way I understood. It didn't glow. It was more like space bent around it, like heat shimmer given form. 3 of Holzer's soldiers opened fire, training taking over, muscle memory faster than thought. The bullets never reached the thing. They ceased to exist, along with the air they traveled through, leaving brief tunnels of vacuum that collapsed with sharp cracks. The soldiers kept firing even as their weapons began to glow, the metal barrels warping, the plastic grips melting into their gloves. I watched the first soldier's skeleton appear through his skin like a photograph developing, the bones going white-hot as the flesh around them turned transparent and then to steam. He didn't even have time to scream. The second managed half a cry before his lungs crystallized. The third dropped his molten weapon and ran, but the thing from the pod didn't chase him. Its presence expanded like a sphere of ending, and when the edge of that sphere touched him, he burned from the inside out. Someone was pulling me backward. Holzer, shouting something about containment protocols, about the entrance, about sealing the breach. But I couldn't stop staring at the thing that had emerged, because my grandmother's stories had never prepared me for this. This wasn't a demon. It wasn't even evil. It was something far worse. It simply was, and everything near it ceased to be. The facility's entrance, 2 kilometers above us, sealed with a sound like thunder. The power surge from the containment failure had triggered the emergency protocols, flash welding 6 tons of steel and concrete into a single impenetrable mass. We were trapped, 2 kilometers below the surface, inside a tomb that had just become an oven, with something that walked like a man, but burned like a star. We'd made it to the elevator shaft, those of us still capable of running. Me, Holzer, Dr. Kepler, who clutched his tablet like a holy relic, a medic named Yates with steady hands and frightened eyes, a young technician called Taylor, and Marshall, one of Holzer's soldiers who'd had the sense to drop his weapon before it melted through his hands. 6 of us out of 23 people who'd been in the sanctum when Pod 1 failed. The others were vapor now, or worse. I'd seen one scientist's shadow burned into the wall like those photographs from Hiroshima, except his shadow was still screaming. "Manual overrides fried," Taylor reported from the elevator's control panel. "The heat surge knocked out half the circuits." Heat surge. That's what she called it. Not the walking star that had emerged from Pod 1, not the thing that had turned trained soldiers into calcium sculptures. A heat surge. The human mind does that, I've learned. Finds small, manageable words for things too large to comprehend. "Service ladders," Holzer ordered, already moving to the maintenance hatch. "Beta level regroup, reach the armory." "The armory?" I couldn't help the disbelief in my voice. "You saw what happened to your weapons. We have specialized ordnance, cryo rounds, electromagnetic dampeners." He wrenched open the hatch, revealing a vertical shaft with metal rungs that disappeared into red-tinged darkness above. Protocols exist for a reason. These people and their protocols. The mountain didn't care about protocols. Neither did the thing moving through the sanctum behind us, its presence making the air itself scream. We climbed. 2,000 meters sounds abstract until you're hauling yourself up it one rung at a time, your shoulders burning, your fingers cramping. But we'd only made it maybe 300 meters when the first real problem hit. The beta-level doors wouldn't open. "Thermal expansion," Taylor explained, pressing her hand against the metal. She jerked it back immediately, skin already blistering. The doors warped in its frame. Through the small reinforced window, I could see why. The beta-level corridor beyond was no longer a corridor. It was a river of molten metal and liquefied plastic, the overhead pipes having burst and melted into flowing slag. The heat coming through the door made my eyes water. "Maintenance shafts," I said. "There should be secondary passages for pipe access." "Those aren't on the schematics," Holzer said. "They wouldn't be. When you drill through a mountain, the mountain tells you where you can and can't go. Your engineers would have had to route around fissures, natural caverns. Those spaces become maintenance areas by default." I was already moving along the narrow platform that ringed the elevator shaft, looking for what I knew had to be there. Every underground facility has them, the spaces between what's planned and what's possible. Found it. A grate, half hidden behind a bundle of cables, just wide enough for a person to crawl through. The maintenance shaft was cooler, but only barely. We crawled on hands and knees through a space that was never meant for regular human passage, past pipes that clicked and groaned with thermal stress. I kept my ice axe in one hand, using its metal head to tap the pipes ahead of us. The ones carrying coolant, liquid nitrogen for the computers, refrigerant for the air systems, rang with a different tone than the empty ones, or those carrying superheat from below. "What are you doing?" Yates asked from behind me. "Listening. The cold pipes are safe to follow. They're fighting against the heat, creating pockets of survivable temperature. Stay close to them and—" A scream from below cut me off. Not human. Metal, tearing itself apart. The Seraph, that's what Kepler had called it in his panicked radio calls, a word from old texts about burning angels, was moving up through the facility. I could feel it in the way the air pressure changed, the way my inner ear started to ache. We emerged from the maintenance shaft into a section of beta level that was still mostly intact. The laboratory equipment had melted into abstract sculptures, but the structural supports held. "The armory's this way," Holzer said, already moving down a side corridor. "Wait!" I started, but he was already gone, Marshall following out of trained obedience. I tapped my ice axe against the wall. The sound came back hollow and echoing. The rock behind the wall panels had turned porous, honeycombed with expanding gases. I pressed my hand against the floor. Through my gloves, I could feel the vibration of flowing liquid somewhere below. Melted rock turned to magma, following the path of least resistance. "We need to go up," I said to the others. "Not sideways. Every second we spend on this level." Holzer's voice came over the radio. "Found the armory, weapons intact. Marshal, check the..." The transmission cut to static. Then a sound that wasn't quite a scream, more like air being forced through a whistle made of meat. We found them 3 corridors over. Holzer was on his knees, staring at his hands. They were fine, unburned. But Marshal had walked 3 steps ahead into what looked like normal corridor. The invisible line where breathable air became superheated plasma was as sharp as a blade. Everything below his chest was still standing, legs locked in mid-stride. Everything above was pink mist still settling on the walls. The heat gradient, that's what Taylor called it. The Seraph's presence didn't spread heat evenly. It created pockets and currents, rivers of death that flowed through the air. You could be standing in survivable temperature and take one step into an oven that existed at the molecular level. "Your protocols," I said to Holzer, and I wasn't cruel about it, just factual. "They assume you're fighting something that follows rules. This doesn't fight. It just is." He looked at me, and I saw something I'd seen before on Everest. The moment when climbers realize the mountain doesn't care about their summit dreams, their expensive gear, their years of training. The moment when they understand they're just soft meat on a rock that touches space. "Then what do we do?" His command voice was gone. He sounded young, lost. I held up my ice axe, its head still cold from tapping the coolant pipes. "We think like the mountain. We flow like water. We find the spaces between hot and cold and we keep moving up." "Up to what?" Kepler asked, his tablet showing readouts I didn't understand. "The entrance is sealed, flash-welded by the power surge. There are other ways out. Natural ones. Your facility didn't create spaces. It just occupied ones that already existed." I started moving, not waiting to see if they'd follow. They would. When you're drowning, you grab any hand that offers to pull you up. My grandfather knew these passages. He called them the mountain's throat, places where it breathes. "That's superstition," Taylor said. But she was right behind me. "Yesterday, you had 7 stars locked in cages beneath a mountain. Want to tell me what's superstition and what's not?" We climbed through maintenance shafts that became tighter as we rose, the facility's grand design giving way to improvised passages carved wherever the mountain allowed. Behind us, below us, the Seraph continued its rise. Not chasing. I don't think it even knew we existed, but moving upward with the inexorable patience of heat seeking cold, pressure seeking release. The beta level died around us as we climbed. Walls slumped into themselves, floors became ceilings, and the neat categories of human construction dissolved into the chaos of melting stone and steel. But between the dying spaces, in the gaps where cold air still fought against the heat, we found our way. We'd emerged from a ventilation shaft to find ourselves in what had once been the facility's nerve center. Banks of monitors, control stations, a tactical display table that now sagged in the middle like melted cheese. The left side of the room was intact, emergency power keeping a few screens alive. The right side was gone, transformed into cooling glass, where superheated air had flash-burned everything organic and melted everything else. The demarcation line ran straight through the room. On one side, a coffee cup still sat on a desk, steam curling from its surface. On the other, a chair had become a puddle of polymer and metal, with something that might have been a handprint preserved in its surface. Kepler stumbled to the nearest functioning terminal, his fingers moving across the keyboard. The screen flickered, displaying readouts that made him go pale beneath his sweat. No, no, no. He pulled up window after window, each one showing the same horrifying data in different formats. The resonance cascade, it's exactly what we modeled. English doctor, Holzer said. He'd found a weapons locker that had survived the heat and was checking ammunition clips, even though we'd all seen what happened to bullets near the Seraph. The containment fields, Kepler said, pointing at a schematic showing the 7 pods. Pod 1 was dark, marked breach. The others flashed with varying intensities of red. When we captured the entities, we had to sync the fields to prevent them from... It doesn't matter. What matters is that when one field fails, it creates a resonance wave that degrades the others. Numbers scrolled across his screen. Pod 2, 47% containment integrity. Pod 3, 62%. Pod 4, 71%. The percentages ticked down as we watched, not steadily but in little jumps, like someone taking bites out of the numbers. How long? I asked. At this rate of decay... Taylor had moved to another terminal, her mathematician's mind already running the calculations. Pod 2 fails in 90 minutes, Pod 3 in 3 hours. After that, the cascade accelerates. Once 3 are free, the combined energy output will crack the remaining 4 simultaneously. 7 of those things. 7 walking stars turning the mountain into glass, the air into plasma, everything within. I couldn't even calculate the radius. Into nothing. We follow evacuation protocol, Holzer announced, as if he hadn't heard a word. Secondary extraction point is the helipad on the north face. We take the sealed corridor to... The north face helipad that's under 40 meters of ice, I interrupted. In October. You'd need 3 days of continuous cutting to reach it from inside. Then we signal for extraction at the primary entrance that's been flash-welded into a solid block of steel? Yates spoke up for the first time in an hour. Commander, there is no extraction. There's no protocol for this. Holzer's hand moved to his sidearm, not drawing it, just resting there, a habit of authority when authority was being questioned. Protocols exist for all contingencies. Section 7, paragraph, your protocols assume the building is still a building. I slammed my ice axe into the tactical table, the point burying itself in the warped polymer. Look around you. Half this room doesn't exist anymore. Your extraction points, your sealed corridors, your command structure. It's all melting. The mountain is taking it back. Then what do you suggest, Sherpa? He said my title like it was an insult. I pulled the axe free, pointed it at the far wall where a crack had formed, moisture seeping through. Not water. The rock itself was sweating. Condensation from the temperature differential. My grandfather mapped caves through this section of the mountain in 1962. Before your people, before this facility. Natural lava tubes formed when the range was young. They're not on your schematics because your architects couldn't close them. They had to build around them. Caves. Holzer's voice was flat. You want us to crawl through caves. I want us to live. I turned to the others. The tubes run at an angle, following old magna flows. They'll take us up and out, emerging near the Rongbuk glacier face. If they exist, Holzer said. If they're not flooded with melt, Taylor added. If the Seraph doesn't cook us while we're crawling through a space we can't run from, Yates said. Yes, I nodded. All of that. But what's your alternative? Wait here for Protocol 7 paragraph whatever to save us, while 6 more stars wake up beneath us. Kepler's terminal beeped. Pod 2 had dropped to 44%. I know where one of the tube entrances is, I continued, behind the water reclamation facility. The builders had to route the pipes around it. It's marked on the original survey as geological hazard, a void. Because that's reassuring, Yates muttered, but she was already packing medical supplies into a field kit, choosing by weight and necessity. Burn gel, radiation tablets, morphine. It's suicide, Holzer said. Abandoning the facility, the mission... The mission? Kepler laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The mission was to contain them. We failed. The mission now is to survive long enough to warn someone that we failed. We don't abandon the facility. Holzer's hand was fully on his weapon now. We secure it, We maintain position until the containment team arrives. What containment team? I asked. Who's coming through that sealed entrance? Who's flying a helicopter to a facility that's about to become visible from orbit as a new sun? That's when he drew the gun. Not at me. At Taylor, who'd been edging toward the door. No one leaves. We maintain position. She froze. We all did. There's something about a gun that makes everything simple and terrible at the same time. Or the complexity of our situation reduced to a metal tube and a finger on a trigger. Commander, Yates said carefully, you're in shock. We all are, but I have my orders. His voice had gone mechanical, like he was reciting from a manual. In the event of containment breach, maintain perimeter, await support, prevent civilian contamination of the outside. The floor lurched. The Seraph had reached the bottom of the alpha level. We couldn't see it, but we could feel it, a pressure in the air. The intact side of the room started to warp, screens flickering and dying one by one as their circuits cooked from the inside. Taylor didn't think. She just moved, diving behind a console as Holzer's attention snapped to the door. The gun swung to tracker, and that's when Yates threw the medical kit at his head. Not hard enough to hurt him, just enough to break his concentration. We ran. Not together. That's the thing about panic. It makes everyone alone. Taylor sprinted for the ventilation shaft we'd entered through. Yates went for the main corridor, the route to the water reclamation facility I'd mentioned. Kepler clutched his tablet and stood frozen, trying to decide between his data and his life. Holzer fired once. The bullet sparked off metal somewhere behind me. Then the heat hit the ammunition in his clip, and I heard him scream and drop the weapon. I grabbed Kepler's arm. We ran toward where Yates had gone, but I looked back once. Holzer was heading the other way, deeper into the facility, toward his armory, his protocols, his orderly death. He was pressing his burned hand against his chest, but still moving, like he could march his way out of hell if he just kept his shoulders straight. The last I saw of him was his silhouette against the dying lights of the command center, walking toward a corridor that was already beginning to glow with approaching heat. Taylor caught up with us at the water reclamation facility. Her face was streaked with tears, but her breathing was controlled, counting breaths like I counted beads. He was going to kill me, she said. Behind us, something exploded, not the sharp crack of breaking metal, but the deep, grinding sound of stone giving up its shape. The alpha level was collapsing, floor by floor, the Seraph's presence turning structural supports into suggestions. I found the cave entrance exactly where my grandfather's memory said it would be, behind a massive water tank, hidden by pipes and 60 years of industrial development. The opening was narrow, barely wide enough for a person with gear. Cold air flowed from it, carrying the smell of deep earth and ancient ice. Yates went first, then Taylor, then Kepler. I went last, taking one final look at the facility that had tried to cage stars. My grandfather had called it the mountain's throat, but crawling through it was like being swallowed in reverse, the rock pressing from all sides, the walls slick with moisture that wasn't quite water anymore. The heat from below had turned the glacial melt into something between liquid and steam, droplets that fell on exposed skin like tiny brands. We'd been climbing through this geological artery for 3 hours, and Kepler was dying. Not obviously, not with drama, just the slow shutdown of a body cooking from the inside out. The radiation exposure from the Seraph's initial emergence, those few seconds when we'd been in the same room as a walking piece of star, had done something to his cells. I could see it in the way he kept stopping to vomit nothing, just bile and blood. The way his hair came out in clumps when he pushed it back from his face. Yates had given him all the radiation tablets we had, but we all knew it was like putting a bandage on a severed artery. "How much further?" Taylor asked from ahead, her voice bouncing off the wet stone in ways that made it sound like the mountain was asking the question. My grandfather's map showed the fissure at the third narrowing. I helped Kepler over a ridge of stone that might have been easy to navigate if his legs weren't shaking. "We've passed 2," The tablet in Kepler's pack kept beeping. Even dying, he checked it obsessively, tracking the degradation of the remaining containment fields like a man watching his own heart monitor. Each time he looked, his face got grayer. "Pod 3 is at 21%, he said, his voice thick with blood he kept swallowing. "The cascade is accelerating." The tube narrowed ahead, just as my grandfather's memory had promised. But this wasn't like the previous constrictions we'd squeezed through. This was different. The passage ahead was barely wide enough for a body, and it was full of water, boiling runoff from the glaciers above, heated by the thermal explosion happening below us. Steam rose from it in clouds that made the air hurt to breathe. "We'll have to swim through," Yates said, then immediately shook her head. "No, we can't. That water's got to be near boiling." 60 degrees Celsius, Taylor said, reading from a thermometer she'd pulled from somewhere. "Maybe 65. Survivable for a few seconds, but the passage is at least 10 meters long," I finished. I could see through to the other side where the tube opened up again, where cold air flowed from what had to be the fissure. So close. Close enough to see the salvation we couldn't reach. Kepler's tablet beeped again. He looked at it, and something in his face changed. "Pod 4 just dropped below critical," he said quietly. "It'll fail within minutes." We all knew what that meant. 4 stars loose in the mountain. The heat output would turn everything within 5 kilometers into magma. The explosion when all that energy hit the ice above would be visible from space. "There's something else," Kepler continued, pulling up a different screen. "When we built this place, we installed a failsafe. Nuclear charges in the foundation, designed to turn the entire vault into glass if we ever lost containment on multiple entities. We called it the Samson Protocol. Bring the temple down on everyone's heads." "Can you trigger it?" I asked. "From any terminal in the facility, but someone would have to go back, get to a functioning console." He looked at his tablet again, at his own hands which had started to blister and peel. "Someone who's already dead anyway. The mathematics of survival are simple when you've lived on the mountain long enough. 2 healthy people might make it through the boiling water fast enough to survive, if they moved immediately, if they didn't hesitate. 3 would take too long. 4 was impossible. And 1 dying man trying to crawl back through the tubes we just navigated, back to a facility that was collapsing into itself. "I'll stay with you," I said. "Help you get back." "No." Kepler shook his head. "You have a daughter," Taylor told me. 9 years old, heart condition. He pulled up something else on his tablet. Not containment fields this time, but a simple timer. "The Samson Protocol has a delay once triggered. I can make it back to the alpha level in maybe 40 minutes if I'm not being careful. If I'm not trying to survive the journey." "That's suicide," Yates said. "I'm already dead. The radiation dose, my organs are liquefying. I can feel them." He tried to smile. "At least this way my death accomplishes something. Keeps 5 stars locked in their cages instead of letting them turn the continent into glass." The water in the passage ahead bubbled and steamed. Behind us I could feel the air getting warmer. The Seraph was following the same path we'd taken, drawn upward by some force we didn't understand. "2 of you can make it through the water," I said to Taylor and Yates. "Move fast. Don't think about the pain. 10 seconds and you're through." "What about you?" Yates asked. I looked at Kepler, at this dying man holding a tablet that might save millions of people if he could just live long enough to push a button. "I know these tubes better than anyone. I can get him back to a terminal faster than he could make it alone." "That's not mathematics," Taylor said. "That's hope." "No," I said, "it's what my grandfather would do, what any Sherpa would do. We don't leave people on the mountain." But even as I said it, I was calculating. The timer in my head, the one that had kept me alive through 20 years of guiding. Kepler saw me doing the math. "There's another way," he said. "The beta level has an emergency terminal in the geothermal control room. It's closer. Maybe 20 minutes if we rappel down the main shaft instead of taking the tubes. 20 minutes. Plus, however long to navigate a facility that was melting like ice cream in a furnace. "Go," I told Taylor and Yates. "Now, while you can." Taylor moved first, taking 3 deep breaths and plunging into the water. I heard her scream, the sound muffled by liquid and stone, but she kept moving. Yates followed, her medic's training letting her disconnect from the pain, focusing only on forward motion. They made it through. I could hear them gasping on the other side, Yates already talking Taylor through the shock, telling her to keep the burns wet, keep moving, don't let the trauma set in. "Your turn," Kepler said. "I told you I don't leave. I'm not going to make it 20 minutes. He held up his hand. The skin was sliding off like a glove. "Go," he said. "Your daughter needs a father. The world needs someone to tell them what happened here." I wanted to argue, but the mountain had taught me the hardest lesson long ago. Sometimes the only choice is who dies quickly and who dies slow. I left him my ice axe. He couldn't really hold it. His hands were too damaged, but he gripped it between his palms like a prayer. I kept my mala beads, counting them as I plunged into the water, each bead a second of agony that meant I was still alive. When I emerged on the other side, skin blistered and lungs burning from steam, I looked back once. Kepler was already moving, crawling back down the tube. His tablet lit his face from below, showing the countdown of containment fields like a prophecy of ending. The mathematics were simple. He had minutes to prevent the end of the world, and I had to get Taylor and Yates to the fissure before we all learned what it felt like to be cooked from the inside out. The fissure opened onto a ledge of ice 70 meters below Everest's north face, and that's where the mountain tried to kill us one last time. Taylor and Yates had made it through. Barely. We'd climbed the final stretch of the lava tube in silence except for our labored breathing and the sound of water freezing on our burned skin. The cold should have been a relief after the heat below, but it bit into our blisters like teeth. When we finally emerged into the grey dawn light, I thought we'd survived. Then the mountain shook. Not an earthquake. The protocol. Kepler had made it to a terminal. Somewhere 2 kilometers below us, nuclear charges were turning the shortened vault into a tomb of radioactive glass. The ice ledge cracked beneath us, a sound like God clearing his throat. I grabbed Taylor's arm as the ledge tilted. We pressed ourselves against the mountain as the ice shelf we'd been standing on carved away, taking half our escape route with it. Below us, through the morning mist, I could see the Rongbuk Glacier fracturing, circles spreading from a central point, like something massive was pushing up from beneath. The detonation, when it came, was silent at first. A flash of light from deep within the mountain that turned the ice blue-green from inside, like looking through a glacier at the sun. Then the sound hit, not an explosion but a roar, the mountain screaming as its insides turned to glass. The blast wave came next. It threw me backward, off the narrow ledge that remained. For a moment I was flying, weightless, my mala beads floating beside me like a rosary of frozen moments. 107 beads, one broken, each one a prayer for my daughter, for the world, for the souls of everyone who died in that tomb beneath the ice. I hit the slope 40 meters down and rolled, the snow both saving me and trying to suffocate me. When I finally stopped, half buried in a drift that would have been my grave if I'd landed a meter to either side, I could see the mountain sealing itself above me. The heat from the nuclear glass was meeting the ancient ice, creating a barrier of steam and refreezing water that looked like the mountain was cauterizing its own wound. The entrance to the Shorten vault, the ventilation shafts, the lava tubes, everything was being sealed in a layer of radioactive glass that would take 10,000 years to decay. 5 stars trapped in their cages, 2 loose in whatever remained of the facility's shell, probably burned out or buried under megatons of molten rock. But trapped. Contained. Taylor was shouting something from the ledge above. She and Yates had held on, pressed against the rock face like lichen. They were alive, which seemed impossible given what we'd just lived through. I tried to stand and couldn't. My left leg bent. The pain hit a second later, sharp enough to make me bite through my lip. But pain meant alive. Pain meant Pema still had a father. The rescue helicopter found us 6 hours later, the Nepalese military responding to what their satellites had registered as a nuclear detonation on the border. They found 3 survivors of what would officially be recorded as a catastrophic geological event at an unauthorized research facility. Holzer, Kepler, Marshall, and the 19 others who died in the Chawton Vault would be listed as casualties of an industrial accident. But I knew what they really were: sacrifices to keep something locked away from the world. They airlifted me to the hospital in Kathmandu. The doctors said things about radiation exposure, about cellular damage, about lucky to be alive. Taylor visited once before she disappeared into whatever security apparatus makes people sign papers and forget what they've seen. Yates stayed longer. She sat by my bed and helped me restring my mala beads. We'd found a replacement for the broken one in the hospital gift shop, though it didn't match the others. She understood what I understood, that we'd carry this for the rest of our lives. Not just the radiation damage or the burns that would scar in patterns like frozen lightning, but the knowledge that beneath the sacred mountain, beneath the goddess mother of the world, 7 stars waited in their glass cages. Waiting for what? We didn't know. Maybe for their containment fields to decay naturally over centuries. Maybe for humanity to forget and dig them up again. Maybe for nothing. Maybe they would wait forever, patient as physics, inevitable as entropy. The doctors cleared me to travel after 3 weeks. I took the bus back to Namche Bazaar, back to the house where Pema was waiting with my sister. She ran to me when I walked through the door, and I held her with my scarred hands, feeling her heart beat against my chest, the defective heart that had saved her life by making me take a job that showed me what waited in the dark. "Did you climb the mountain?" she asked. "No," I told her. "The mountain climbed through me." She didn't understand. How could she? How could anyone who hadn't been there? I still guide when my body allows it. I take climbers up the established routes, the safe paths, the ones that don't go near the north face where the ice is fused with glass, where the radiation levels are still too high for prolonged exposure. They ask about the restricted zone sometimes. I tell them it's geological instability, unsafe ice, toxic minerals in the rock. I don't tell them about the 7 stars sleeping beneath their feet. But sometimes on clear nights when I'm at base camp, I sit outside my tent and count my prayer beads. 107, plus one that doesn't match. I count them for the people who died in the vault. For Kepler, who crawled through hell to push a button. For Holzer, who followed his protocols into death. Even for the Seraph, which wasn't evil, just incompatible with a universe made of meat and bone. And I count them for Pema, who's 13 now, whose repaired heart beats strong and steady. I count them to remind myself that the world continues, that children grow, that mountains stand, even with stars buried in their foundations. The other guides think I'm praying when I count the beads. They're right, in a way. But I'm not praying to the mountain goddess anymore. I'm praying to her to keep sleeping, to keep her eyes closed, to never look at what we've hidden beneath her skin. Because if she ever wakes up and sees what humans buried in her sacred body, I don't think our prayers will be enough.